the Abrahamic covenant and the promise of the land. The Abrahamic covenant has long been a cornerstone of theological discussion among Jews, Christians, and Muslims. While the Judeo-Christian tradition identifies Isaac as the covenant's primary heir, a significant body of Islamic scholarship maintains that the covenant's fulfillment comes through Ishmael, the forefather of the Prophet Muhammad. This interpretation emphasizes two core elements: the inheritance of the land stretching from the River of Egypt, commonly identified with the Nile, to the great River Euphrates, and the universal blessing promised through Abraham's seed, understood to be ultimately realized in Muhammad and the religion of Islam, regarded as the restored faith of Abraham. 1. The promise of the land. In the book of Genesis 15:18, God promises Abraham, "To your seed I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates." Islamic scholars who hold the Ishmaelite fulfillment view interpret this promise as pertaining to Ishmael's descendants, not Isaac's. They point out that Ishmael, as Abraham's firstborn, was blessed by God, Genesis 17:20, to become a great nation. They argue that this land promise finds its historic expression in the geographic spread of Islamic civilization, from North Africa, along the Nile, across the Arabian Peninsula, and extending toward regions near the Euphrates. This territorial reality, they contend, is not coincidental, but rather a visible sign of the covenant's realization through Ishmael's lineage. 2. Blessing to all nations. In Genesis 12:3 and 22:18, God declares that through Abraham's seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed. Islamic interpretation sees this ultimate blessing embodied in Muhammad, a direct descendant of Ishmael, whose mission was not confined to a single people, but extended universally. The Quran echoes this in Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 107. "And we have not sent you, O Muhammad, except as a mercy to all beings." From this perspective, Islam is not a new religion, but the restoration of the original monotheism of Abraham, free from the tribal exclusivity sometimes associated with later Israelite identity. The faith's global spread, moral code, and unifying message are seen as the fulfillment of God's promise of universal blessing. 3. The sacrifice of Ishmael. The question of which son Abraham was commanded to sacrifice lies at the heart of this theological divergence. The Quran, Surah As-Safat 37:99-113, narrates the event without initially naming the son, but the sequence of verses places the announcement of Isaac's birth after the sacrifice episode, implying that Ishmael was the son offered. Proponents assert that Ishmael's role in this trial signifies divine confirmation of his status as the covenant's chosen heir. They maintain that the shift to Isaac in the Hebrew scriptures represents a later alteration by Israelite scribes to bolster their own national claim to covenantal blessings. 4. Scriptural alterations and covenant identity. Those who uphold the Ishmaelite view argue that ancient Israelite scribes reframed certain historical narratives to affirm Israel's unique claim to God's promises. In their understanding, the Torah's emphasis on Isaac as the covenantal son serves to align the covenant with the Israelite nation, while the Quran restores the original truth of Ishmael's role. 5. The Sinai Covenant, a separate agreement. The Sinai Covenant, delivered centuries after Abraham, was made specifically with the Israelites. It outlined a detailed legal and moral framework binding the Israelite community to God through laws and rituals. Unlike the Abrahamic covenant, which Islamic scholarship sees as global and unconditional, the Sinai covenant is conditional, requiring obedience to maintain divine favor. This distinction reinforces the view that the land and universal blessing promises belong not to the Sinai covenant, but to the Abrahamic covenant, and therefore, according to this interpretation, to the descendants of Ishmael. Conclusion. Within this interpretive framework, the followers of Muhammad are seen as the true inheritors of Abraham's covenant, heirs to the divine promise of the land from the Nile to the Euphrates, and the bearers of the universal blessing foretold millennia ago. Islam, as the restored religion of Abraham, reaffirms the original monotheism, the inclusive message to all nations, and the geographic destiny that was set forth in God's ancient promise. Far from being a mere theological debate, this understanding shapes how millions perceive history, identity, and divine purpose, viewing the spread of Islam not as a historical accident, but as the direct unfolding of God's covenant with Abraham through Ishmael.